On behalf of Father Bodine, our pastor, I welcome all of you to the Church of St. Peter as we have our festival weekend. We maybe have more guests with us, and we're blessed to have you here with us. And hope you can enjoy the evening outside afterwards for the festivities. Especially we have all-star wrestling, and that's a big ticket. As it said in our advertisement, Super Clash 2. All-star wrestling. I made a mistake last year. I went to the wrestling and I left halfway through and I went and did something else. That's when the chairs came out. So you always got to stay to the end. So I'm going to make sure that I'm there at the end today, this evening. And then tomorrow, of course, we have our pork and turkey dinner as well. So you're welcome to come for that as well. As someone said before last year when I was my first year here, someone said to me, wow, church dinners, you don't usually have real plates and silverware. You don't usually have such a home-cooked meal. And so it really is a treat. You can see the cookers out here waiting to start at 4:30 in the morning tomorrow morning. God bless those who get up to do that. I would like to draw out of our gospel today two dispositions or two ways of living life. Or we might say two attitudes of how we go about life, or two movements, all different possibilities. And it really is true if we think about it, if we reflect on our lives, it's like, what are the fundamental attitudes, how I operate in life? What are they? What are those fundamental attitudes, those fundamental ways that I live? I guess one way to put it is, what are my priorities? What are my priorities? Another way we can put it is, what is our disposition? And two dispositions we see in our gospel I'd like to talk about. And of course, these are two dispositions where I'm saying it could be this way, it could be that way. And of course, it's not one or the other, and it's not all or nothing. It's rather a gradation between the two of them. And so this is something we can think about. Where am I on this gradation between these two realities that I see here in the gospel today? So the first that I see in the gospel is it's an attitude, it's a way of life, it's a movement of heart where we want to take for ourselves. Now, of course, like I said, this can be a grievous taking for ourselves by robbing a bank, or it could be a less grievous way of taking for ourselves by just being kind of selfish. And of course, we all have some of that. But I see that we could see that here in the disciples as they're walking. Jesus notices they were talking, and they came to Capernaum. And once inside the house, he began to ask them. When Jesus asks a question, it could be challenging. And so he says, "What were you arguing about along the way?" And of course, they were arguing. Well, actually, it says they remained silent. They remained silent because. Yeah, he knows what we were arguing about along the way. And they had been discussing among themselves who was the greatest. And, if we know a little bit about the Jewish time and following a teacher, following a master, following a rabbi, you wanted to be like him. You wanted to learn what he knew. You wanted to become the greatest. You wanted to become the most learned of the followers of him. And so maybe there's a sense of understanding that reality, but that's not the way it is with Jesus. That's not the way it is with Jesus. Sometimes I laugh when I read the gospel because I'm like, no wonder people don't want to follow Jesus. He is not an easy person to follow. Because he says here, if anyone wants to be first, he shall be the last of all and the servant of all. Jesus is challenging. He is challenging. And so his followers, his disciples, they want to be first. Maybe you can recall in your memory how the mother of James and John came to him and said, Master, when you come in your kingdom, I want you to grant me this favor. And of course, she wants the best for her sons. In another gospel, it's James and John themselves who say, Master, we want you to do for us what we ask of you. They're taking. They want to take they don't want to take number one spot. They want to get up to the top. They want to take. And that's really recalls us, it encourages us to examine our conscience, because really, in a certain sense, our world, in many ways, it's like taking. We take and make yourself the best and do what you need to do to get ahead. And now initiative is very important and very much part of the gospel, taking initiative. But to take for oneself, really that's not the fundamental disposition. That's not the fundamental attitude before God. Because we see what the fundamental disposition and attitude is before God in our other example in our gospel. Now it's not like this word for word, but we can understand it. Because Jesus said, he was teaching his disciples that the Son of Man will be handed over to men and they will kill him. But really what the truth is Jesus allowed himself, he gave himself over so that he could die for us. So the other attitude of life, fundamental attitude, is to give. To give. An attitude of giving, a movement of giving, a disposition of life where I give, a way of life where I give and I give and I give. You know, as I say this, I know that we know people like this, and maybe in all humility we have some of these characteristics, thanks be to God. But you know, if you think of somebody that gives and is generous and has that way of life and that attitude, wow, I want to be around that person. Not so I can receive, not so that they can take care of me, but because it's inspiring, but because they are loving, because that's the way we should live. And that's the way Jesus lived. We recall his words, nobody takes my life from me. I lay it down freely. So Jesus' fundamental attitude is to give. And the disciples' fundamental attitudes is they want to take. They want to take. And so that's an examination of conscience for all of us. Once again, it's not whether we're one or the other, but rather where are we in the spectrum of I want to give and I want to take. And in this context of the Mass, it makes me think of the Mass, because one other disposition of heart, and we have to be careful about this as well, one other disposition of heart is to receive. Because in truth, how did Jesus give? How did he give to the last drop of his blood, if you will, on the cross? How did he do that? This is the beauty of the Christian faith. He received. Jesus received. Jesus often went off by himself to a lonely place and he prayed. He needed to receive from his Father in his humanity. Jesus, his relationship with his Father was the sources of his strength to do what he did. And so we see another movement of receptivity. So there's really three movements. There's a movement of taking, which is not of God. Taking for ourselves, and I got to go out and do it myself, and I got to go out and whatever it takes for me to get the job done, that's what I got to do. Once again, I'm not talking about taking initiative. That's a good thing. But not to take as in to be selfish, but rather to give as Jesus gave. And once again, to be able to give like that is unhuman. It's not natural for us to be able to give sacrificially. And where do we get that gift to be able to give? Well, I'm gonna end my homily with the words we'll hear in just a moment, which give us the grace to be able to go out and to give rather than to take. We need to receive first. For on the night he was betrayed, he himself took bread, and giving you thanks, he said the blessing, broke the bread, and gave it to his disciples. We need to receive. Gave it to his disciples and said, take this, all of you. This is a good sense of taking, because we're receiving. You notice that when we receive communion, we don't take it. I think that's really significant. We don't take communion because we receive from God. We don't take from God. We receive the good that God wants to give us. And so it's a receptive position, whether we're receiving communion on the hand or receiving communion on a tongue. We're not taking it. God forbid that I should ever take communion. But God, yes, often and very often with great fervor, that I would receive communion. And so Jesus wants to give it to us. And so he says, take this. He's offering to take it, and then we can receive it. All of you, and eat of it. For this is my body, which will be given up for you. That's the giving that gives us the gift to receive so that you and I can give. You see, it's a whole circle here. Jesus gives his life to us, and then he says, take my life, take my body. This is given up for you. And then we receive. And then he says, go out and give. Go out and give. And so if we just receive, but we don't give, it could be a dead end. I receive and it gets all stuffed up in me. And then he says in a similar way, when supper was ended, he took the chalice and giving thanks, he said the blessing and gave the chalice. That's what Jesus does. He gives. Gave the chalice to his disciples and said, take this, all of you, and receive it in a sense, and drink from it. For this is the chalice of my blood, the blood of the new and eternal covenant, which will be poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. So 3 fundamental movements in our lives. To take, as the disciples were, that's not Christian. Once again, we can have initiative, that's good. To give is Christian. But in order to give, we have to receive. Where are we going to receive from? From Jesus. This is my body, which is given up for you. This is my blood, which is poured out for you. When we receive that gift, we truly can become generous givers, just like he is.